One topic, two arguments, three people seeking the truth. Today's topic is how could a loving God knowingly create a world with so much suffering? So, welcome to the second Advent podcast. Today with us we have a new guest. This is Nicholas, Patrick, and so on. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Just quickly, I'm a Christian unificationist. We grew up in the church together. And these topics are very interesting for me, theology in general. So the first time I do a podcast, and I hope I can share something that is interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. So today's topic is, in a way, a topic that has sprouted like an endless type of debates within Christian denominations, let alone what the atheists also use it a lot to challenge believers in a way. And we will be talking about this topic with the premises that God exists. So we will not be questioning God's existence. And if anybody between the listeners, the viewers are interested into that type of topic, they could check out our previous video. We will, at the end of each argument, they will have a vote at the end of each round and vote for the one that seems to us like a stronger argument, or in a way, an argument that cannot be easily counter-argued. Okay. So let's begin.
Okay, so my first argument, basically, I do not believe that a loving God could knowingly create a world with so much suffering because, he knew it from the very start. At least this is what most Christian denominations say, that from the beginning of time, he already knew that the world he was going to create that would end up having these cycles of suffering, right? And of course, the kind of usual Christian response is that humans are responsible for evil, not God himself. But even that, there is still this tension because God knew already, even before he created, that everything that happened from the beginning until today, then it means that the future already existed in a sense, and that would be incompatible with free will.
My first argument is I don't believe there's an easy way to justify a God that would willingly create hell, because hell is a place that in many depictions is supposed to be an eternal suffering, right? And this to be judged basically on a short amount of time where you supposedly have free will or don't, and the effects of it are astronomical. If for eternity you are supposed to suffer in this confusing world, I don't think this makes much sense to me.
Yeah, we will in a way go through it in the second phase more, because there are different views on this, of course. But I do agree with you that it is hard to find a good justification in a certain sense for most people to this type of issue. Yeah. Okay, so my first argument, and actually my both arguments today, are going to be in a way to present what is the main view of Christians. Because I feel like it's important to bring up also their perspectives into this. I will be presenting as a first argument an argument that has to do with Arminianism and Molinism in a certain sense, which are two of the views on God's foreknowledge. And their argument, which will be my first argument, is that God knows their future free choices and actions they will take, not because he causes them, but because they will happen, simply because they will happen. So that means that although the knowledge is chronologically prior to the action, logically these actions happen before the knowledge. So after the actions logically happen, God knows them in a certain sense. So you can imagine you have option A, you take option A. God knew you were going to do option A. But if instead of doing option A by your free will, you would have done option B, then God knew that you were going to do really the option B. So that's my first argument.
Okay.
It's a way of putting some logic behind it. And it could make sense, but this is very philosophical, I would say.
Yeah, we will discuss it better later. Okay, time to vote.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess. Okay, interesting.
So who? Okay, so let's begin from Patrick. Why did you vote for Suwon?
Oh yeah, I think that overall the logic just kind of makes sense to me. I wouldn't say that, again, I necessarily agree with it, but I think it's a good argument that in this kind of topic just makes sense and establishes a good start for the
Okay.
whole topic.
All right. And I voted for you simply because I know that the topic of hell is a very tough, like you need to give a very good explanation. And I know that many non-believers feel like you, that hell is a place of suffering. God created it, and it doesn't reflect the being a loving God. So I think he deserves a good answer. That's what I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the second round then.
So my second argument is basically saying that we need to review this idea of an absolute foreknowledge of God from the time begin, because God's loving character is that of, I think, of a parent that gave freedom to his children, and especially when you start with the fall, where kind of evil, this rebellion supposedly has started, there was a genuine choice to things could have gone basically a different way. It's kind of like say that the Bible could have been rewritten with another story if people had actually chosen something very different, right? And so, and later I will explain many biblical passages that support a conditional unfolding of God's providence, let's say, based on human free will and based on how humanity responds to God's commandment, what we call the portion of responsibility that humanity has. And so, which means that God is not really knowing from the beginning of time what will happen if it has to still happen yet. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I hope I explained.
You articulated it well,
Mm.
but there's a big question that comes from it, is that what are the limits of God? If he didn't know or there was a choice, of course, this is connected to the free will, but there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's important to frame it well, because it doesn't mean that God is not powerful. God doesn't intervene in human history, and God cannot influence events or things like that. We'll talk in more detail later.
My second argument is that free will is not easily defended and can be easily put in doubt, which would be the detrimental problem for the whole debate, in my opinion. And to actually add to that, I feel like the point of view of Christians could answer this even better, because from what I understood, the general knowledge is the belief of free will not existing and the God already knowing and everything. And this would fit more so far with the knowledge I have before this debate of what physics right now believe as well.
I mean, Christianity mostly believe that we do have free will, although maybe the current, perhaps the one you meant more, is the Calvinism, the eternal decree.
Yes.
In that case, there is not really a kind of free will, although they still try to kind of smuggle it in a way that we have still experienced some kind of freedom, right? But their view is definitely closer to what you were saying now in a certain sense. But all the other branches, they see it a little bit differently.
Okay. I was, I guess, specifically mentioning this one, so sorry if I offended anyone.
Okay, so my last argument is that, despite God knew that evil, there will be evil and suffering, a lot of evil and suffering, he still created in the end the world, because ultimately it's worth it, and ultimately he will find a way to redeem it. So that's my second argument.
All right, let's vote.
1, 2, 3.
All right.
No, you like yourself.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be awkward to vote for myself.
No, it's good. It's good.
So,
it's honest.
Yeah, I would say why I voted for Swan. So I mean, I besides the fact that I'm unificationist too, but no, I think that he brought up some aspects that we are going to discuss more in the second phase that, in a way, are a little bit different from the main Christianity takes on this, on the topic of foreknowledge. And I think that they are quite strong suit, in a way, strong arguments that we can use in this debate, this discussion.
Honestly, I just like the phrasing and the message. I guess that was in your argument, and maybe some wishful part of me hopes it's to be true.
Yeah, I think it's very catchy. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we finish the arguments, we start with the second phase. So I think we will go through each of the arguments more in depth now, and I would like to start from the free will topic because, as Patrick said in his second argument, I feel like it's important to first establish what free will is in a certain sense, and if there is a free will or not, because it is kind of the base upon which we can develop everything else.
Right. So, is there any kind of definition that we can agree on for what free will is, and if it's achievable, and if so, how?
Well, I mean, in a way, if you go through the dictionaries and so, first of all, we have to say freedom and free will technically are not the same thing, although they are very much connected, obviously. So in a way, freedom is the capacity, the ability to be able to do what you want to do without any external coercion, constriction of kind. And free will, it's the step before, in a way, the internal ability of being able to choose what you want to do. Then actually making it concretely into an action, that's freedom. So while you can be, let's say, you can have the free will of deciding internally that you want to go to America, if you don't have your passport, you won't have the freedom to achieve it. Okay, so we can start from this type of.
On the science side, obviously there's different opinions, but what I came to the most is the belief that we always, as humans, choose whatever we want the most, right? And this way, you sort of don't have a free will according to science or according to some interpretations of it, because all the things that you want the most are always affected by external things. Like there can be an easy question that is like, when did you make your first free will decision? Because if you think about it, when you were really small, it's very easy to say that a child that is like just born is not making choices, right? Or is it?
I mean, obviously, I know that there are environmental and societal influences that affect our character, affect our mentality, and by that, we then pursue different choices in our life. But I do believe we're constantly making choices throughout every single day. And if you think about influences, I do, especially as a Christian, from a Christian perspective, we do believe that there is kind of a war between ourselves, because there is constantly two different inclination. And, Paul in the Bible makes it clear that we are somehow slave to sin, and we are in our flesh has some desires. And even if you're not a believer, you know that sometimes you're doom scrolling on the Instagram or whatever.
Yeah.
And
just for non-believers, it's doom scrolling.
No, I don't.
Because of the doom,
I didn't. No, I didn't mean that. I'm just going to present an argument that is non-religious, so that somebody, even if you don't believe in sin, right?
Right.
Like you have a tendency, for example, to slack off or just be lazy, and then you have a voice inside that says, okay, maybe you should work out, maybe you should do something different with your life. And it's not that you want to do the most one or the other, it's at a certain moment you're making a conscious decision to listen to one of the two, basically, or one of the 10 ideas that you have in your mind.
Okay, if I can add something on this, in a way also, I do think that what you're saying in part is true, in the sense that at a given time, given the circumstances around you, it might even be true that you choose to do always, let's say, what you want to do the most. But the point is that it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no free will, and I will explain why. I don't think that free will is necessarily tied to the ability or the capability or the possibility to do otherwise. I think that the core of the free will, you can say you are a being that has free will, is that in the end you are able to make a choice based on what you want to do the most, not somebody else So it doesn't really mean that you have to have the ability to do otherwise. It means more is of an internal, let's say, if you're able to do what you want to do the most. But you also said, and this is also why actually your argument is that way it was strong, that in scientifically some people will argue that whatever you do is a byproduct of, let's say, the society or your environment where you were brought up.
Well,
and so
in
on.
essence, it's a byproduct of everything.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
point.
I get it. But what that would be leaving out is that in all of that, it is true that there is all of that. It somehow shapes what we do, it influences us. Also, like Suwon was saying, the 10 voices, But in the end, one of these voices, if there is one of these voices that is your true self, that is trying to tell you what you want the most, if there is that, then free will is still existing. That's what I would argue. And the point is, though, that some people will never listen to their true self, in a way, their true self. And those people effectively are not exercising free will. They are free will because they are just letting other conditions dictate their actions in the end. And that's kind of a matter of discipline and control, right? But if a person is able to control those external things and in the end do what his true self wants to do, that the person did exercise, from my point of view, their free will, and they are truly free in that moment.
Yeah, I actually, sorry.
Yeah.
Because I think if someone is very new to this topic, it might surprise them to speak about free will in this kind of way. I maybe will just try to get them introduced to it a little bit by saying this analogy. I heard this and I felt like it's a pretty good way to imagine this. Imagine if mathematically you could make an equation, and this equation would involve every single influence, everything in the universe, and it would have to actually include everything. It's theoretically possible, but not practically, right? Because even just to make this computation, you might need more energy than is in the universe. But the point is, with this equation, you could predict the future theoretically. So this is just so you understand why it's put in doubt from the scientific side.
Yeah, but going back to what I was saying, in a way, that the point is that because you can, if it was only about everything out, all the outside things that influence you, I would agree that you can calculate that ideally, theoretically. But because I believe that there is the true self, your true self inside, that can ultimately, let's say, turn the tables around all the influences. That's what I think makes it so that actually it will never be computable, because there are for sure examples in normal lifetime, non-normal people that grow up in a certain environment, right? That theoretically would push them in one direction ultimately, and many will end up doing that. But there will be always at least one person that for some reason will go completely against that, even though he had the influence. And there will be many other people that instead will not. But the point is that, and I think that's where it changes, is where a person is capable of, even among pretty strong pressure and from the outside, able to still express what their true self wants. And that's why I say that I think that even when you choose to do what you want to do, even if you choose to do always what you want to do the most, if that is a result of your true self, and sorry, I say true self all the time, and I haven't explained what true self is in a way, so that's my bad. But it's very much connected to what Suwon was saying. So from a Christian point of view, like in John 8:34, I will just read it because I want to make sure I get it right. It says, Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." So what Jesus is saying, which is also what in a way Suwon was mentioning before, is that when you are exercising sin or wicked actions, you're not being truly being free, but you're actually letting down, in a way, control of the wicked external factors that and you let them control your actions in a certain sense.
External or internal, I guess.
External. When I say external, yeah, that's right. When I say external, I don't mean that they are just outside of you. I mean they are not outside of your true self. So like Suwon was saying, Christianity believes that inside of us, we are not just one person. That may be the misunderstanding with most people or most viewers. When I say true self, I mean that there is inside of you let's say your consciousness, or how Reverend Moon calls it, your original mind. Okay, let's call it that way also. That once only was really good for you, for God, so you have that in you. But because of the fall, as a consequence of the fall, we also have external, but not external to us, but internally to us. We have something external that tries to push us to do evil. So we have an internal conflict of our true self versus our not true self. You could say our false self, if you will, or our evil mind, how Reverend Moon calls it. And this is why I'm saying that not always what you will do will be what you truly want to do the most. Will be what you want to do the most as a whole, ultimately, but not what you truly want to do the most. And that depends on the degree of control you have over the wicked internal aspects that are trying to influence your actions. So that's how Reverend Moon puts it.
Just before we continue, I felt like you implied here that if you don't, let's say, follow this true self, you are not exercising free will. So you don't have a free will.
Yes.
So there is a condition whether you have or don't have a free will.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Whether you are exercising it or not. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the question that arises from this is, how do you get free? How do you become more free?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would argue that requires control. So what Reverend Moon calls it, or how he defines how you can achieve that, is mind and body unity. So Reverend Moon explains that during your growth, you need to discipline yourself to the point that your mind controls your body, meaning that you train your to listen to your true self, what your true self wants for you, and you control the wicked desires that come to you, and then try to make you go in a different direction. Of course, in order to do that, you have to know, to understand what is right from what is wrong, and that also in the Bible is explained in a way how to do that, because you learn the moral, the objective morality of God. You learn what is right, what is wrong. So meaning you have to train yourself to have self-control of those wicked desires. So that means that true freedom can be reached in that way by having more self-control.
But I would add that your father says that this mind and body unity can only be achieved centered on God. So from a Christian standpoint, you cannot control your sinful nature without Christ, without God.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's the duality of also, consciousness. It's something that's very unexplainable till now. I feel like there's not really a final answer to how do we keep continuous consciousness throughout our life, even though the cells of our body, they change all the time.
They die and they're replaced.
Yes, they're replaced. So there is some argument to be made that there seem maybe some place for a spirit or something there. You know what's the most beautiful? I actually cannot quote who said it, but some philosopher or scientist said that there are two possible truths in this world or in this universe, and I choose to seek both of them. And he meant science and religion. So there's definitely a case here. That's why we are speaking together.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I think to close this topic, I will just mention one last thing. So, because speaking about the fact that there is this external influence that pushes your true self to do evil and whatnot, may sound almost like we are implying that this means that when we do evil is not really our fault or our responsibility, right? And some people may end up arguing in this direction, but also according to what I was saying, we shouldn't forget that in the end, we are responsible because we have the choice to either control those desires, and so doing the right thing, let's say, or not control them and have them control our actions. So there's still the choice. Although you could argue that the desire itself, the wicked desire itself, is not your responsibility in a certain sense. You could argue in a certain sense. Okay, it's debatable, but the choice to make to control it or not is still what we are accountable for.
Okay, maybe something that I have to follow up with this is something that you mentioned, Suan, is about Messiah and the fact that we need a Messiah for some things. It's interesting to me, like, why are we not capable of resolving everything on our own? Like, if we are kind of the chosen and in the image of God, why are we not powerful enough for this?
In a way, the reason why we are in this situation, the situation in which we are required, we need the salvation through the Messiah, is a direct result of the fall. So that's what also Christianity will argue, obviously. But as unificationist, Reverend Moon adds on that also it means that prior to the fall, we were not meant to reach, let's say, salvation or perfection of character, call it what you want, to reach the God through the salvation. But the salvation became necessary because of the fall. So if there was no fall, in theory, we can make an argument, the salvation would not have been necessary.
What do you mean by salvation in this case?
Well, literally, you need the Son of God to reach God. Because through the fall, technically, we fail to a state in which we do not basically belong to God anymore. On our own, unfortunately, because of this detachment from God that was reached through the fall, we need God's Son to come and bring salvation to us. So to restore us, to restore us to the condition before the fall.
Okay, so let's get back to the fall, just so we set up some things. So, maybe can you explain to me from your perspective of unificationist, what is the view? Like, what's maybe different from Christianity?
We have a big, our theology revolves a lot on explaining what was the root cause of the fall. We talk about it, that it was a illicit sexual relationship. And we have a very, I think, strong reason why do we believe that it wasn't a literal eating of an apple. It wasn't just even like a rebellion that you cannot describe exactly how you rebelled. We speak, we have very good biblical reason for why we believe that. And so if you're more interested, you can definitely check the website
and we will definitely make a future video on the topic specifically to the fall, because it really deserves to be spoken about thoroughly. Yeah. So I think we can move on now to the second, to another argument. So the argument, let's speak about the argument, your second argument, the one about
hell,
God and hell. Yeah. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I just want to remind maybe everyone of it. It's very hard to understand how a loving God would create hell, because especially in the depictions that I know of, hell is a place that you are eternally tortured in. And, I've met many people, and, the world is a very confusing place. It's definitely not a place where, everything is set in stone and everyone understands what is right, what is wrong. Like, maybe there is some general morality, but it's not so well understood.
Yeah.
So how can a God justify hell? That's basically the question.
I don't believe exactly in a God who just judge you, even though the biblical, the biblical the narrative described is always, kind of a judgment where, let's say, if I told you that you are jumping off a cliff and, you break your bones, I don't believe God is punishing you for challenging the law of gravity by giving you the punishment of a broken bones. It's just God established very clear physical laws, and you don't normally, you're not stupid, and you consider them, and so you don't willfully or starve yourself or do things that harm your body. But due to the fall, we came to such a low point in our spirit that we do not recognize the moral law and the spiritual law that God has established, and so we end up hurting our own spirit, hurting God, hurting others, and we do not really, we maybe perceive a lot our better, we do not perceive the state our spirit which is in. But sin ultimately cripples the human spirit, or if we do not feed just like we feed our body with food, with water, and our body grows and becomes strong, if we do not feed our spirit, that ultimately it becomes a spirit to suffer. That's why I think also, Jesus said he's the bread of life. Who comes to take my water will never thirst. These are kind of biblical analogies that mean that we need to, our spirit needs to grow. We need to resemble God. We need God's love, and ultimately, hell is a place where, our spirit is crippled and malfunction.
If I can add something on what this one was saying, also from the Christian perspective, based on the denominations, there is a lot of differences on the view of hell, right? So there are some Christians that may have maybe the view that you were saying before of hell, like an eternal punishment that given by God or decided but judged by God. But there is also a lot of Protestants and evangelicals that will argue instead that it, like Suwon Moore was saying, it's a torment you do on yourself in a certain sense, and there are even some maybe Orthodox or other currents of thought that basically say that when you are you reject God, you are so far from God, you basically almost cease to exist. We even talked about this in the past. In a way, it's called, I think, annihilationism is called the current of thought. But anyways, the point is that there are different points of view. Unificationists believe, in a certain sense, like some Protestants do, that it's not really God that condemns you to eternal hell or to hell in general, but you choose where you go based on how also Suwon was saying, based on the state of your spirit at the time of your death. So that's the first thing I would put on the side. So it's not God saying you go here, you go there, but rather you go where you are able to go. But still, I do agree with you that it seems like very harsh, that still for what you did during 100 years, you end up eternally in hell.
If you're lucky.
And this is what the Christians call the bad news. The bad news is that if you sinned even once, if you sin multiple times, you are doomed to hell, because the standard of God is absolute goodness, right? So if you did even something small, it doesn't matter, he killed somebody, I didn't kill anybody, you still lied, you still sinned in many different ways, you were not always 100% aligned with God or with goodness.
Specific to me.
Specific to me too. The point is that Christians will argue, and we also argue about that, all of us technically in front of that standard of goodness are destined to hell, and that's the bad news. But the good news is that God couldn't let that happen. And God's heart is the heart that he wants to save everybody, because we are all of incredible value to God, like his children in a certain sense. Yeah, in that sense. But anyways, point is that he wants to save us all. So the good news is that Christians will say he sent, because of the fall, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and through the acceptance and following Jesus Christ, we can receive salvation, and we can get out of hell. Now, but you were making a good point. You were saying how fair can it be if during your life you haven't had the opportunity to receive Jesus in a certain sense, and then you end up eternally in hell. And this is why, as unificationists, we actually challenge the idea of the eternal condemnation. So there are some verses in the Bible that hint towards the eternality of hell, and we are not, what we argue is very similar to what is known as the universalism view on this topic. That is basically, yes, hell itself is eternal. The flames in hell are eternal. The punishment, so to say, or torment, you could say, is eternal. But your stay in hell is not necessarily eternal. It's conditional to your rejection to God and Jesus Christ. So this means that if you reject God and Jesus Christ forever, you will be eternally in hell and eternally in torment. But if there will be a change of heart, then as it would happen on earth, it may happen in heaven, that you have a chance to redeem yourself. The point is, though, and this is of course to be argued, and it might be another topic we can discuss another time, it is very much possible that it's a process that on earth takes a simple choice of following Jesus, while in heaven may require much more time. But this is different, of course, topic. Yeah. All right. So now we speak about the third argument, but in reality, we're going to speak about basically the remaining arguments, because all the remaining arguments are around the topic of God's foreknowledge. Now, we have established about free will, about God and hell. About the foreknowledge, I would like to start by explaining very briefly what are the main Christian perspectives on the topic. So the first one would be the absolute predestination or eternal decree type of view over foreknowledge, which is what the Calvinists mostly argue. And they argue that God eternally decreed whatsoever comes to pass. So everything that happens is a direct result of God's will. They do not believe, obviously, though, that God caused evil. They basically blame it. The responsibility of the evil is on those who commit it. So they argue that it is not God that does the evil, but he only decreed the actions, and then you are the one that ultimately are accountable for it.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I understand your point of view, but they have some good verses to argue for the fact that God eternally decreed everything, but I do agree with you. Yeah,
it's like judgments just to torture or Okay. And what is there another?
Yeah, there is then Arminianism, and that's most Protestants and evangelical people have this type of view, which is what I presented in my first and second argument, basically. So while they do believe that God has foreknowledge of what will happen in the future, they don't believe that God causes them. So it's not that God eternally decreed them, but it is that they will just happen because you freely will choose to do them, right? But God knows that you will do these things. So he doesn't cause them, and so he is not to be blamed for it, right? But he knows. Yeah, that's what they will argue.
It sounds like a roundabout way to take away his responsibility for what happens, actually.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, I mean...
it's not to offend anyone, just like observing what you say about
I mean, there is an analogy that explains very well this view. It is basically the infallible barometer, which Tim Barnett, one very great apologist, brought up. That basically you can imagine a barometer that is always able to tell what weather will be, and it will never fail to do that. But even in that case, you wouldn't blame it on the barometer, or you wouldn't say that the barometer caused the weather. Rather, the barometer knows the weather, what is always going to be. So he says the God's foreknowledge is somewhat close to this kind of analogy. Yeah.
No, okay, I take it back. That's actually a very good analogy, and it explains it. Yeah.
And then we have Molinism. Molinism is not that far from Arminianism, and is very, let's say, famous around Catholics and also some other Protestants in a way. And they argue similarly to the Arminianism that God does not cause directly what you do, and you're still free. Libertarian free is there as well. But they believe that you came in three phases. So in the first phase, you had God before he created. He had infinite possibilities of worlds based on our free will that would unfold. At some point, though, God chose which world he wants to trigger, you could say. And ultimately, he knew, of course, everything that was going to happen in that world. So God knows everything that will happen because he chose this specific world. Okay, so this is what, but in the end, it's very similar to Arminianism, except for this, the way it came about, his foreknowledge. And the last one is Thomism. Actually, it's not the last one. Anyway, the last one of this category is Thomism, which basically is the Roman Catholic Church points of view, which is God existed before time. They would argue that he exists in a timeless state. So that means that the God's foreknowledge doesn't work in a way as you can imagine it, but that all the events are in one point, let's say, at the same time, let's say. So that's why God knows everything, because everything is he can see everything at the same time. So it's a little bit more, in a way, mysterious and hard to understand, but that's the view that they hold, the timelessness of God. Now, the issue that they all have in common, though, and then also Suwon was arguing against with his first argument, is that, okay, in one way, it's as if you say Calvinism has one linear, view of time. Everything happens because God decreed it. And you would say, okay, Arminianism tries to branch it out by saying you can choose to do this or that or this. But ultimately, even in these branches, God knows what you're going to do. So in a way, it's again linear, if you understand what I mean. Because there is still, in the end, you will choose to do one thing in any case.
Yes, but depends, because you argued actually for this kind of free will back when we were speaking about free will.
Yeah.
So
I'm not
this is
saying
basically what you were saying.
Yeah, and even in that case, it can be still free will, because it's still you choose to do what you want to do the most, right?
Right.
But what I'm trying to say though is that they are also in the end have kind of a linear point of view, although they create a lot of branches around, but in the end only one line of events will happen, right? And the same is for all the others. But God having foreknowledge is a problem from our point of view. From my point as unification, is because God, even so he didn't cause these things directly, like Arminianism say, God chose to create this universe in the end. So you could, even if you wouldn't blame him for what I do, for what you do, you would blame him for having created this universe knowingly. And this is where all of these views that are presented so far would collapse unless they justify it or they explain it some way. Of course they do. They will say, like I said in my second argument, that ultimately it's worth it, right? But is it good enough? It's based on,
I guess depends, right? Because it could be worth it, but anyway.
But they basically are saying that there couldn't be a better world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's strange.
That's hard to imagine.
Well, you can actually imagine a better world already. Yeah. Like, you don't even have to hypothesize about it, because you can imagine a world where maybe like light suffering, like a suffering that can lead to growth, exists.
The problem for me is that ultimately, I would say that God, having full knowledge of what will happen with this much suffering and this much evil, I still would feel like you would have to say at least that he couldn't create the universe in good conscience. You'd be like, oh, ultimately everything will be okay. Yeah, but still, like, so much suffering for so much time. And also there is multiple Bible verses that explain God. Basically in Genesis 6:6, God regretted having created humans after the fall. How can you explain that?
Actually, something comes to mind. You could explain it with the meta time, because you yourself said that it's almost like a book, and the book is and always will be and always was. So in a weird way, you could say that in the meta time outside of this universe, the decision kind of was made and wasn't made. It's hard for us to grasp, but there is some logic behind it, that it could have been and always was. Also, this decision that he will create this universe, and all these bad things kind of happen, but it still makes logic between this meta time where everything happens at once.
Right. I mean, actually, that's only Thomism, though, because all the others don't actually have different views also on time and God.
Because they touched on it in that one there.
I believe there's also another view.
Yeah. So I will explain the last view now. It is still Christian, but is much less spread, and is also much more recent. In the 90s, it started spreading among Christianity, and it's still not very much spread, and it's called open theism. Now, open theism takes a very different direction. God's omniscience is to be rethought or redefined in a certain sense. So omniscience is God knows everything that can be known. And they will argue that the future actions, because of our free will, cannot be known. If they cannot be known, that doesn't actually decrease God's omniscience, because he knows everything that can be known. Okay? And that's what they will argue. And they will say that the future then is not settled yet, meaning the future is open, and that is why it's called open theism. So, but they also argue that some futures are settled, closed, and some are open. So based on if God chose to close them or not, in a certain sense. And their view comes very close to the unificationist to the unificationist view, and then it makes it even more interesting because unificationist thought around this topic came in the 1950s from Reverend Mon, and is a revelation that he received that that before was not ever put in the way that Reverend Mon explained it. And open theism comes much later, about 40 years later than this view, but it comes super close in terms of definition. Suan, do you want to present?
Yeah, first, personally, for me, again, as I said at the beginning, the absolute foreknowledge, because if the future is already foreknown, it means that it's already written in some part of the mind of God. And if it's written in a part of the mind of God that, let's say, Cain was going to kill Abel, then that was going to be the only thing that was going to happen. So it does really bring a lot of paradox in free will itself, right? It does. And as you were saying, there's in the Bible, I think there are like 400 to 800 that are conditional statement, where God says, if you do this, then I, like if you repent, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves, then I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. Or there's so many of this type of statement in both the Old Testament and the New Testament that explains that God's accomplishment of his will is contingent or conditional to human responsibility. And that is not to say that God doesn't have any power to shape history or to bring forth his will, because he's actively, we say that God is like 95% of responsibility and human beings 5%, in the sense that God always tries to bring history forward to ultimately restore us to the original idea that he had, that pre-fall, he had an ideal for his creation, which was, the three great blessing that we see in Genesis: be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over the earth. It was like a blessing for whole humankind, where there wouldn't have been this struggle between good and evil. There wouldn't be humanity falling prey from Satan's temptation and completely messing up. But that happened, and that's why God has tried to restore it. But he couldn't have ultimately known that as the only possible thing or that was going to happen, because there was a genuine choice. And I like to bring even the Cain example, that Cain was very angry at his foul face. And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. For it has a desire for you, but you must rule over it." So in that moment, God tells Cain that he has the possibility to rule over that. And he really says basically, Cain, don't do it, don't murder your brother. You're better than this. And Cain could have chosen. And if Cain did not kill Abel, like the whole Bible would be different, because the whole history, because actually we see this struggle between, let's say, rivalry between brothers on all levels of society, rivalry between nations, and wars, and we see is always kind of this resentment between two sides. And another passage is that no temptation has overtaken you except as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. So another verse that says that historical figure in the Bible made bad decisions, and ultimately, like let's say David, killing Uriah and having lust for Bathsheba, all these things that happened, any single of these choices could have been different. So ultimately, what we can see is that we believe God's always ultimately will accomplish his will, but there is a prolongation. And one example that comes to mind is the Exodus, where people could have gone to the promised land in 21 days, but they're repeating, frustrating, where they're stubborn, they were stiff-necked people. And these 21 days became ultimately 40 years. And you have moments in the Bible where God says, okay, because you were unfaithful, then this time for you that you have to go through this shall be prolonged. So that's kind of our unificationist view of a providence that has unfolds dynamically based on human's portion of responsibility.
Yeah. So if I can just maybe summarize it in some way also, to make it even clearer in a way, but and you did already a great job about that. But I would say the way we see it is that God's predestination, because we cannot, as Christians in a way, we cannot not account for the fact that in the Bible there are predestination, there are some prophecies that hint towards predestination, right? So how do you explain those? Well, you can explain that in the unificationist way as they are conditional, is a conditional predestination. Is a predestination that God does based on the thought that, or the knowledge that most likely these people will end up doing this choice, and this will bring about this, and this consequence. So God is able to, in his omniscience, he can, as we said before, God can know everything that can be known, meaning that he can know that if I do this choice, there will be these consequences. So that's the part of the conditional predestination. But at the same time, we have the power, right, to change it if we don't fall into temptation, or if we ultimately choose to repent. And there are many examples in the Bible. You see the difference between the main Christian perspectives and the open theism and our position is that all of these other Christian perspectives, they have to say that in the Bible, everything that is in the Bible points to God having full knowledge of what will happen. Meaning that for open theism and unificationism position to be right, is enough that there is one occasion in the Bible, one occasion in which God didn't know what was going to happen. If you have one occasion, already the whole concept collapses. And like already you mentioned some Bible verses as such, and there is definitely, like I was saying before, let me see if I think I have it. For example, God regretted ever making King Saul. God regretted ever making
King Saul as a king. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. And one thing, for example, was in Jonah 3:10. In Jonah 3:10, God told Jonah, go to Nineveh, which was a city, and tell them that they are doing evil and they will be destroyed. They will be overthrown in a certain amount of time, very soon, right? So Jonah, we know the story. He didn't want to do that. He was afraid of being killed, so he escaped. He gets eaten by the fish after he repents, and then and he gets out of the fish because of his faith, and he decides to realign with God. And ultimately, he goes there and warns the people, like God told him to. What the people do, though, change the outcome, right? God, it seems like God made an absolute decree. They are going to be overthrown because they failed him. But they choose to fast. And everybody in that city fasts. And even they make their animals fast. It's crazy. And the king does too. And ultimately, God decides to not let this happen. And it doesn't happen. And they are not overthrown. And that's one, and there are many others that bring about the fact that God did not know what was going to do, right? But he knew that what could happen. Okay, so that's why we say it's conditional predestination. As I would just give one analogy in a way to top it off, which is very interesting to explain how God works in a providence, as you said, of restoration, which means to restore after the fall, to restore us back to state before the fall. So that's why we call it providence of restoration. But it works in the following way. God has a will, right? He wants us to get to a certain place. Let's call it our destination. And imagine like in Google Maps, you choose the destination, right? And the difference is that instead of God driving the car towards the destination, God put us to drive the car towards that destination. Now, if we follow what the Google Maps tells us to go, the optimal way to get from point A to point B, we'll get there in, let's say, 20 minutes, okay? But because we are free people, because we chose to rebel against God in this scenario, right? We chose at a certain point, instead of going straight, like the Google Maps was telling us, we go to the left, we take a left turn. So now Google Maps will readjust the whole plan to how to get to point B. But the point B is still there. It's not going to change. What does change is the amount of time it will take to reach point B. So every time we make a choice that goes against God, we rebel against God, God, because he has the absolute omniscience, he knows exactly what can happen and how to readjust his plan, he will keep readjusting. So that's how we can explain how not everything that happens is part of God's plan. And many people struggle in life because they go through really bad stuff, and a lot of suffering, and many people find it very hard to believe. And this is why many stop believing in God in a way when they go through hardships. They just cannot believe something so bad could be done by God. Even if it's, the ones that are still able to believe in God will tell to themselves it's part of a bigger plan, right? It's still, though, it's hard to accept. There is a reason why, from my point of view. And the reason would be that it is not God's plan. But God is able, however, to readjust his plan to still bring about ultimate joy and happiness for humankind. But what happened to you, the bad thing that happened to you, is a result of our failure as humans, and also the result of Satan's work against God that tries to destroy us. But God is relentlessly working throughout history to change the course of these events and to stop this suffering. So it's a very different perspective for normal Christianity, the one of open theism, and also ours as unificationists.
No, it's a very nice analogy with the Google Maps. Yeah, it's nice.
I think it's we discussed this topic quite a lot. So just to close it, I wanted to read some words from Herman Moon, because ultimately with this topic, I think it kind of reveals a heart of a father who really interacts and tries to save his children, and depicts how sorrowful God is in this situation. I just gotta read them. How sorrowful God was when Adam and Eve committed the fall and sank away from him. They were to have been the ideal partners for God, who embodies the pure essence of love. God's sorrow exceeded that of any person. He grieved so very deeply. The deeper and greater the value of what was lost, the deeper the sorrow. This is the situation of God, who has pursued the way of restoration for his lost children. And another one, God is absolute, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Then can he also love as he pleases? No, God is also under the dominion of love. Then what can we say about God? Isn't God omniscient and omnipotent? If we ask him, God, are you not omnipotent? God will answer, I am omnipotent, but not when it comes to love. Why is God like that? And I guess, it's because, love requires a relationship, a response. So if, you walk away from God, God can really, love as
Reciprocate.
Reciprocate, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And because of the fall, happiness, life, and everything were cut off from human beings, and humanity fell into deep despair, darkness, and misery. Tears began to well up in the eyes of people who had lost hope. God is our Father, our parent. Can you imagine that God's sorrow was indescribably greater than what human beings felt? And so, here Father depicts, God's parental heart, and what I like about this is that many times when we think about a relationship with God, we want God to help us. We want God to help us to overcome this or that problem, to bless us, but ultimately we don't often think, okay, what is the situation? It's like if I love my father and my parents, and I have 10 brothers, and 9 of them, like 10 of them, 11, when they are like in a very difficult situation, they're just they suffer a lot. As a filial son, as a son who loves my father, my parents, I would, really notice how much they grieve and how much they are trying to help. And what I want is for my children, for my brothers and sister to also ultimately, be happy, and for the sorrow that my parents are experiencing to be alleviated. And I really like how Father pushes us to really recognize this type of God. So that we can, ultimately do good, and not really to God just as is a way to receive, but really empathize and being a good children to Him. And there's many quotes of True Father that this is just that depicts this, and yeah, again, like I said before, on the Second Advent website, you can find a lot of his teaching, a lot of more in depth, this whole what we talked about. And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. God bless.